Have seen people lose lives, livelihoods and health. Today's celebrations is an opportunity to acknowledge the progress being made towards reducing disaster risk, and the 2021 edition focuses on the international cooperation for developing countries to reduce their disaster risk and disaster losses. All right, and today this world is celebrating International Day of Disaster Risk Reduction, a day that aims to promote a global culture of disaster reduction, including disaster prevention, mitigation and preparedness. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says for the world to meet a cascading of challenges of the 21st century and safeguard their lives, health and livelihoods of all people, nations must reduce systemic risks and strengthen their system of governance in order to avert disaster risks. Let's listen in.
Challenges of the 21st century and safeguard the lives, health and livelihoods of all people, we must reduce systemic risks. Weak governance, growing poverty, biodiversity loss, collapsing ecosystems and unplanned rapid urbanization are all interconnected drivers of disaster risk. Left unaddressed, they aggravate the intensity and frequency of disasters and increase the need for humanitarian assistance. And they stand in the way of our global effort to defeat COVID-19, adapt to climate change and build forward better. Just 24 hours advance warning of a storm or heat wave could reduce the ensuing damage by 30%. However, many low and middle income countries lack adequate early warning systems. And when disaster strikes, weak health systems and infrastructure leave them even more vulnerable. Decades of development gains can be wiped out in an instant. Building resilience to climate change and reducing disaster risk and losses is vital to save lives and livelihoods, eradicate poverty and hunger, and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. For small island developing states, it is a question of survival amid warming oceans, rising seas, and intensifying storms. Effective risk reduction relies on international cooperation and global solidarity. It is about ensuring fair and equitable access to vaccines for everyone, everywhere, dramatically increasing funding and support for climate change adaptation and resilience building, and delivering on the Sendai framework. On this International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, let us commit to cooperate to build a safer and more resilient world.
Indeed, a safer and more resilient world is the goal here. And of course, we are with experts who are going to help us dig deeper into the status of disaster management, both in Kenya, in Africa, and the world over. Over the past 2 years, we have had the pandemic to deal with. In Kenya, currently, we are having a drought and a state of emergency has been declared. That's another disaster. We are having wildfires being reported in the United States. We had the situation in Australia. At the same time, we also had floods in Europe. So it's safe to say that we have some way to go, and of course a lot to think about when it comes to disaster management. And joining me here in studio to discuss this is Alessandra Kasanza, who's the manager UNDP Resilience Hub for Africa, as well as Rukaya Mohammed, who's the deputy country director of UN Women. We are also extended an invite to Sunya Ore, the deputy director NDMA. We're hoping that he's going to be able to join us as we go along with our discussion. But let's get started. Now, Ms. Kasanza, I hope I'm not butchering your name. Let's talk about this day. Why is it important to celebrate the International Day of Disaster Risk Reduction 2021?
Thank you very much. Well, I would like to actually thank KTN and the show for having invited UNDP and particularly the Resilience Hub in Nairobi, the Resilience Hub for Africa, to speak about this important day. Today is a very important day. I welcome the opportunity to celebrate it together with your audience. Why is it important? COVID-19, we're still not out of the woods. We're still grappling with a global crisis that has had enormous impacts on communities and people, particularly in the continent.
Yes.
We are also in the midst of a climate crisis. We have all read the report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change a few weeks ago, which has actually depicted a very grim picture about the way in which we are treating the planet. If we think about the fact that about 50% of all disasters are climate-related, of course, we need to think about what we can do about climate action. Most importantly, today is also a celebration that has to do with reminding ourselves of our commitment, international commitment as international community, to cooperate, particularly with developing countries, to strengthen their capacity to manage disaster, to prepare for disaster, and particularly to build their resilience.
All right. Now, also with us, like I told you earlier on, we have Ruqaiya Mohammed, Deputy Country Director of UN Women. Now, with special focus to women, why is this day particularly important?
Thank you very much. Thank you for also inviting UN Women to participate in this important discussion. I think it has never been more important than today to focus on this important topic, given the rises nature of disaster that we experience globally and also in Africa. Just to mention that a drought actually has left more than 45 million people in need across 14 countries in Africa. We also have cyclone in Madagascar, in Mozambique, in Malawi, in Zimbabwe. That has actually killed about 1,303 people and affected more than 3 million people. Majority of them are women. In East Africa and the Horn of Africa also, we also have seen the rise of flood affecting millions of people. And then the invasion of fall armworms, and also that's also destroyed acres of land, affecting livelihood and also exposing people to critical food insecurity situation. Just to come down to the Kenyan context, the disaster profile is actually dominated by drought. We also have fire outbreak, we have flood, we have terrorism, diseases, epidemics that disrupt people's livelihood, destroy infrastructure, divert plant resources, interrupt economic activities, and retard development. Just to show a trend, between 2016 and 2017, many parts of Kenya suffered from drought, long droughts, and subsequent 2 years, 2018, 2019, and also it flipped with a vicious cycle of rain. Then, as the flood was over, then we were hit by pandemic, COVID. And this COVID actually, then after, within the same context, now we have locust invasion. And that is also affecting food production and exposing about 3 million people across the country with severe food insecurity. So we discussed for why it is important for women. We discussed of water. Now, women in Garissa County are said to walk up to about 20 kilometers in search of water, and we know what this means. This means that they spend less time to do productive work, and also working long distance expose these women to sexual and gender-based violence, and they are very, very vulnerable. So this day is very, very important for us so that we see that disaster, actually the impact of disaster is not gender neutral. It affects men, women, and children differently, and it's important for us to celebrate the success and then how we can.
Absolutely, and we're going to dig deeper into the disproportionate effects of the coronavirus on women the world over, and perhaps what solutions we can get out of this, because there are so many lessons. And speaking of lessons, I'd like Ms. Kasanza to tell us what she feels we have learned so far and what the coronavirus pandemic brought to the fore in terms of disaster management.
Thank you. Yes, so we have learned quite a lot from the experience of COVID-19. First and foremost, we have actually learned that risks are multidimensional and they are actually interconnected. A crisis that set itself as a health crisis has actually sent shock waves throughout the entire systems, all the domains of sustainable development. We have seen impact on the socio-economic dimensions of sustainable development. We have seen impact on the governance issues, on the governance areas. We have seen how COVID-19 has delayed election, has delayed, for example, reform processes. We have seen what's happening right now, for example, in Europe in terms of unleashing violence. So what are the implications and what are the lessons? The lessons are that we cannot have any longer a silo approach to disaster risk management. We cannot look at hazards on a silo basis, but we need to have a very holistic, integrated, multidimensional approach to that. If we want to build resilience, we need to look at risks in an integrated and multidimensional manner.
Right, and of course that is very important because this now leads to how we are handling the situation. When you look at, could you compare our reactions in Africa and the rest of the world? And of course we have the issue of vaccine apartheid. How is the world handling that issue, and do you think we could do better?
We can definitely do better, and I think I want to go back also to the theme of the International Day on Disaster Risk Reduction, which is about international cooperation and about the need to increase actually international cooperation to actually fulfill our commitments as international community to actually collaborate to support one another as international community to actually deal with the pandemic. Of course, vaccine equity is what is on the top of the agenda. If we want actually to come out of this crisis as a collective and globally, we need more vaccine equity, we need more access to vaccines in the continent, and we need also, first and foremost, to strengthen the long-term resilience of the continent, also to invest more in vaccine production capacity in African countries and in the continent overall.
Right, and would you categorize it as a moral issue or disaster management issue, or is it both?
It's a justice issue.
Okay.
It's a social justice issue.
Okay, it is a social justice issue. Now, Ms. Mohammed, on your end, like I said earlier on, the effects of the coronavirus as a disaster, if we can categorize it as such, has been disproportionate to women. Could you tell us some of the things that have retrogressed in this period that we need to focus on in order to go back to the level at which we had gotten in terms of getting the equitable situation for women and men when it comes to employment and access to health care and all the areas of concern?
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me just begin by actually quoting the World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap Report, which says that the impact of COVID-19 pandemic actually, as we continue to feel the impact, closing the gender gap has actually increased by a generation. That is about 37 years. So it has taken us backward. So you can see that there has been increase in gender-based violence, so which means that all the gains that we have made in terms of the prevention effort, the response effort, and also increasing women's resilience, we have gone backwards. So we need to really strengthen and amplify how we do response of GBV, how we do prevention of gender-based violence, how we coordinate different actors. It has actually also affected education. Schools were closed across the world, and it has impacted Africa the most. So it led to a lot of teenage pregnancy, intimate partner violence. So this has actually, even some girls will never go back to school again.
Right.
This is a huge, this is a huge thing that has a huge cost to gender equality. We've also seen how it has disproportionately affected women actually whose sector, who are largely in the informal sector. Now most of them are unemployed. In fact, they lost their livelihood. They are not able to meet their needs, and it makes them more vulnerable to gender-based violence.
True.
The same to women, we are at the front line of this pandemic. Women constitute about 70% of healthcare providers in the hospitals, and
Yes.
also they are the caregivers at home. So it has actually increased their burden as a result of this pandemic. So we really need we have to double or triple our effort if we want to actually achieve the target that we set ourselves for the Agenda 2030.
Absolutely. And speaking of those numbers that you have put to the fore, it's quite, it's been termed by UN Women, I think on the website, it's calling it a shadow pandemic. Yeah, something that is happening under the folds or underneath another health crisis, and therefore not getting the right amount of attention, and therefore we risk going back so many years and even decades in terms of the gains, and now would have to work even harder to undo some of these things that have happened. So what do you think needs to happen if we are to keep up, or rather catch up, when it comes to fighting for equality and against gender-based violence, ensuring women get the right kind of healthcare they need? What needs to be done?
Thank you so much. So we had generation equality, so it was a global forum actually to get more commitment on how we can advance gender equality. So the forum happened in Mexico this year, and also in Paris, where actually commitment makers, we had global leaders, corporations, civil society, youth, and others made commitment, bold commitment, financial, some are technical expertise, and others on how we can advance gender equality and women empowerment. So now we focus on 6 key areas that needs to be accelerated. So we call them action coalitions on gender equality. There's one on economic justice, there's one on ending violence against women, which Kenya is one of the lead. Then there's also one on feminist leadership, there's one on technology, and then also bodily autonomy. So these are the areas that we really critically have to advance, but we need a lot of international solidarity. We need commitment, we need resources, we need to also channel. So there has been more than $40 million commitment during the forum, and some of these resources should go down at the grassroots level, support women rights organizations. Let's build structure. Let's also strengthen institutions. We want to focus on prevention. When we focus on prevention, I think it will save us a lot than we wait and then respond. So we have to prevent gender-based violence. We have to strengthen women participation in leadership.
Yes.
So where the major decisions are made, we have to increase women participation in peace and security spaces. We also have to enhance women's economic empowerment in all spheres.
Okay. Now, when it's not all about the coronavirus pandemic, there are other forms of disasters that the world is facing. And I'd like us to focus on Africa. Ms. Kasanza, could you give us some data on the situation on the continent?
Yes, it would be good actually to have a sense of the scope and the frequency of these disasters and how actually disproportionately these disasters affect the African continent, and why do they affect the African continent more is because of a lower level of institutional capacity actually to prevent disasters and to prepare for them. Just to give you a sense of a sense of the scope. In the past sort of 10 to 12 years since 2008, about 157 million people in the African continent, in sub-Saharan Africa, have been affected by disasters. This is, just to give you a sense, is about 3 times the population of Kenya. So is an enormous number of people being affected by disasters in the continent. I would like to also stress the fact that 50% of these disasters are by and large related to climate change, which actually leads me to the point that is absolutely critical now to really focus on climate action. What can we do actually to increase and step up our investments in terms of climate change adaptation? Just to also give you a sense, in the Horn, I mean, we are in the middle of the Horn of Africa here in Kenya. The Horn in the past 2 years only has been impacted by floods, has been affected by an infestation of locusts, has been impacted by a drought. You know, currently we are actually living in Kenya a severe situation of drought and COVID-19, not to mention also all the conflict. This requires, of course, a multidimensional and holistic response to prevent and to prepare for this kind of disasters.
Absolutely. And you're talking about disasters and preparedness. Some of these things are predictable. We are in parts of Kenya are experiencing drought, but there are mechanisms to predict some of these things, especially when you talk about climate change. There's a lot of talk about it locally, on the continent, internationally, but we are able to predict that there's something coming. What can we do to ensure that we are more proactive in ensuring that we are not caught off guard? Because a lot of the things that are happening, when you've talked about a population 3 times the size of Kenya experiencing disasters that are of climate in nature or that are influenced by climate change, these are things that we have seen coming, but we're not doing enough to prevent them. Is it a question of funding? Is it a question of awareness? What's the problem?
Yes, it's very complex. It's a matter of everything. It's a matter of investments. It's a matter of political will. It's a matter of commitment. It's about also putting in place integrated and multi-hazards early warning systems that actually can tell us, you know, what is coming, what are the hazards that are at the horizon, and how can we face them. But beyond early warning systems, and a number of countries, including Kenya, have them in place. You know, IGAD is actually one of the institutions that is more advanced in terms of early warning systems. We also need early action, because without early action we can't do anything about that.
Yes.
So it's important that there is also not only the political will, but also the mechanism that can be put in place to respond to disasters
yes.
when we see that they are coming, or hazards.
Now, this brings me to the question of green action. What countries need to enact this? Or rather, green recovery.
Green recovery. All of us are part of this commitment. You know, with COVID-19, there is a lot of countries have actually suffered enormous GDP losses.
Yes.
I mean, we do know how severe on the economy COVID-19 has been, and there is, of course, there could be the temptations from countries actually to go back to the old path or the old economic growth sort of pathways to actually recover fast.
Yes.
There is actually here an opportunity to change path and to move to a different, greener, more sustainable pathway towards economic recovery and economic growth.
Absolutely, and I'd like to get your sentiments on this issue, Ms. Mohammed. When it comes to women issues and some of the things that women have suffered, could you give us case studies that countries on the continent and even Kenya can look to that have acted pretty well when it comes to disaster management? Because we all know that women are the more vulnerable group when it comes to disasters. They suffer more than their male counterparts because they are, of course, the weaker sex. Unfortunately, we have to put it that way. And of course, they are taking care of children, and they have bigger burdens, sometimes more than their male counterparts. So what countries are doing very well in this, and who can we emulate?
Thank you very much for this question. I think there are a lot of countries that are also actually doing a lot of work in this disaster risk reduction. This effort of disaster risk reduction, but what we really emphasize, and the technical expertise that UN Women bring on board in supporting these countries is just to help them, like to include, to ensure that women, so countries that have more women leading in the development of disaster risk reduction plan. Also, when the government is giving technical support to have to be able to use gender marker to track the resources that has been located in the implementation of that plan. And when the plan also is informed by the needs of men, women, children, then it's likely to be, is going to be very, very stable, and it's going to be very, very sustainable, because it will enhance the resilience and facilitate recovery of women and girls who suffer through the disaster. So actually it is about inclusivity, it's about making sure that the voices of those who matter count. As we know, women's livelihood actually depend on what they do: farming, fishery, they do forestry. So they are mostly hit by that. So when countries that really involve their voices, when formulating policies, when formulating their plans, and also let them lead in the implementation, and also involve them in developing the early warning systems, then they stand a better chance of actually overcoming or helping people to recover quickly when disasters strike.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to take a short break. On the other side, we shall dig deeper into disaster management. We will be focusing on DDR, that is disarmament, demobilization, reintegration capacity programs, and we're also going to talk about the situation up north with the drought. How can this country cushion its population better? And now that we are in it, what can we do to get our people in a safer environment and more sustainable way of living, so that we're not finding ourselves in the same problem yet again? Do stay tuned. You're watching Morning Express.